In a 17th-century New England court, a family remains defiantly united. William, a tall, thin man with a straggly beard and intense eyes, stands before a rudimentary court of Puritan settlers. The silence is heavy, and soon a voice of authority from an elder seated at the front accuses William of insubmission, pride, and of judging himself above the law of God established by the community. William, with a rigid posture and a voice loaded with religious fervor, does not back down. On the contrary, he reaffirms his convictions, quoting Bible passages and declaring that the colony is corrupt, that the men there have strayed from true faith. His tone is not one of supplication, but of challenge, and each word seems to dig the distance between him and the judges even deeper. His wife, Catherine, stands beside him, her face pale and tense, her eyes darting between her husband and the judges, her body sheltering the youngest child, baby Samuel, wrapped in cloth. His eldest daughter, Thomasin, on the threshold of womanhood, watches with an expression of silent apprehension, while his son Caleb, a serious and devout youth, mirrors his father's rigid stance. The younger twins, Mercy and Jonas, too young to understand theology but not tension, cling to their mother's skirts. The sentence is pronounced with cold, final words. William is banished from the plantation and excommunicated from the community. He accepts his fate not as punishment, but as an affirmation of his righteousness. Without hesitation, he calls his wife Catherine and their children to leave, declaring that it would be a relief to be expelled from his company. The family turns their backs on the only civilization they know and walks out into the unknown. After the verdict, and with no return, the family leaves through the gates. Catherine's face is lined with worry and fatigue. Thomasin keeps an anxious gaze, and Caleb, the teenage son, alternates between curiosity and fear, not fully grasping the gravity of the moment. The family travels in a wagon, crossing fields and streams, until days later they find a clearing on the edge of a dense, dark forest. There William raises his hands to the sky, praising God for giving them a place to start anew. They build a small cabin, erect fences, clear land to plant corn. Life is harsh and marked by ceaseless labor. Catherine tends to domestic chores. Thomasin milks the goat and washes clothes. Caleb helps his father in the fields, while the twins spend their days running and chanting strange rhymes to a black goat named Black Philip. The atmosphere is poor, but there remains the illusion that faith and effort will secure survival. Thomasin prays for forgiveness and God's protection. One morning, Thomasin takes Samuel outside the cabin and moves to the edge of the field, playing peekaboo with him, covering and uncovering his face. The baby smiles innocently, and the distant sound of the forest is only leaves rustling in the wind. Suddenly, while Thomasin covers her eyes with her hands, the silence deepens in an almost supernatural way. When she opens her hands, Samuel is no longer in the cloth. In the blink of an eye, he has vanished. Thomasin looks around, confused, then panics, screaming her brother's name. She runs to the forest's edge, but there is no sign of him. Far from the house, deep in the dark woods, the truth of Samuel's disappearance is revealed in unspeakable horror. A hooded figure, moving with supernatural speed, carries the naked baby to a crude, filthy cabin. The figure reveals herself to be an old, wrinkled woman, her skin pale and her eyes shining with ancient malice. She lays the baby on a wooden table. With ritualistic, deliberate movements, she takes a small, sharp knife. What follows is an act of grotesque desecration. The witch grinds the remains into a bloody paste. With this horrible salve, she anoints her own naked, aged body and a broom handle, a ritual of power extracted from the stolen innocence. Back at the cabin, Catherine is in tears, praying without stopping, begging God to return her child. William tries to comfort her, but his own expression reveals uncertainty and fear. The corn they planted is failing, the ears covered in fungus, and game is scarce. William decides to go hunting to make up for the lost harvest. He takes Caleb with him despite Catherine's orders to keep him home. Moments later in the woods, William teaches his son to set a trap, but hides from him that he will sell Catherine's silver cup to buy traps and supplies. Ahead, they spot a rabbit standing on the trail. William aims the musket, but the gun misfires and the recoil makes the lock strike his face, injuring him. The rabbit flees, leaving only frustration. The children, Mercy and Jonas, sense the tension. They begin to torment Thomasin, accusing her of being a witch, of having made a pact so that the baby would disappear. Caleb, torn between loyalty to his father and a feeling of guilt, struggles with his own temptations. He feels responsible for the family's misfortune, believing that his lack of faith or some unconfessed sin has brought God's wrath upon them. He is also awakening to his sister Thomasin in a new and confusing way, his looks lingering on her longer than is proper, a sin that torments him in the quiet of night. In a desperate attempt to find food and prove his worth, William takes Caleb into the forest to hunt. Unfortunately, the expedition fails. The forest seems to resist them, and the animals avoid them. A frustrated William confesses to Caleb that he swapped Catherine's silver cup for hunting provisions, a lie he hasn't told his wife. He makes Caleb promise to keep the secret, a burden of dishonesty that adds to the weight the boy already carries. That night at supper, Catherine notices the cup's absence and accuses Thomasin of losing or stealing it. Thomasin denies it, but the mood becomes strained. Soon after, Catherine pushes William to send their daughter to work in another house, saying she brings disgrace. William does not answer directly, but his silence is almost consent. To Thomasin, this is a betrayal, an expulsion from her own home. Feeling cornered and guilty, Thomasin decides to act. The next morning, she wakes Caleb before dawn, proposing they enter the forest to hunt, to prove their worth and perhaps reverse her sentence of exile. Caleb, eager to redeem himself and help his sister, agrees. They enter the forbidden woods, and their dog Fowler accompanies them. Along the way, Caleb asks Thomasin about Samuel and whether he is in heaven, but she, with irony and resentment, jokes that maybe not, leaving her brother uneasy. In the woods, the rabbit appears again, and Fowler runs after it along with Caleb. The horse is startled and tosses Thomasin, who falls and faints. Caleb, lost, finds the dog dead, its body thrown on the ground in a brutal way. He comes upon a small moss-covered cabin that emits a strange feeling of attraction. The door opens, and a beautiful, seductive woman in a red cloak emerges. She walks toward him with an inviting smile. Caleb, paralyzed by a mix of fear and desire, cannot look away. The woman approaches, wraps her arms around him, and kisses him. At the moment of the kiss, her hand, which had seemed young and soft, reveals itself to be wrinkled and decrepit, the hand of the old witch. Thomasin awakens at dusk and manages to make her way home, muddy and disoriented. Her arrival alone and the return of the horse without her brother confirm the family's worst fears. William and Catherine are convinced they have lost another child to the forest. That night, a storm batters the house. Thomasin finds Caleb outside, naked, feverish, and delirious. They bring him inside. Caleb is in a catatonic state, his eyes empty, his body trembling uncontrollably. The family gathers around him, fervently praying for his soul. Caleb begins to convulse violently, his body arching unnaturally. He screams, his voice distorted. Then, in a horrible spasm, he vomits up an entire apple. Seeing this, the family recoils in terror. After the convulsion, a strange calm settles over Caleb, who then rises. He proclaims, in a voice full of joy and relief, that he sees Jesus and that his love is warm. It is a vision of religious ecstasy that precedes his death. He breathes his last with a smile upon his lips, and his small, fragile body falls limp. Caleb's death is the final catalyst for the family's disintegration. Pain turns into hysteria and accusation. Mercy and Jonas, in panic, openly accuse Thomasin of being a witch, of having bewitched Caleb. This time the accusation is not a game. It is real and venomous. Thomasin retorts, saying that it is they who speak with Black Philip. William, his faith utterly shattered, turns on his own daughter. He seizes Thomasin, drags her outside, and despite her cries of innocence, locks her in the barn with the goats, along with the accusing twins. He believes that by containing the witch, he can somehow save what remains of his family. Alone in the house with Caleb's body and his wife in catatonic mourning, William falls to his knees. He makes a desperate confession to God, admitting his pride, his stubbornness, and his inability to lead his family. He admits to coveting and taking God's name in vain. It is the confession of a broken man who realizes too late that his pride led him to a literal and spiritual desert from which there is no escape. Meanwhile, in the barn, night falls and terror intensifies. The twins fall asleep, But Thomasin remains awake, her mind wavering between fear and a growing anger at the injustice she suffered. She hears a sound outside. The witch's figure, wrapped in rags and shadows, is a vision of horror. Her skin, wrinkled like ancient parchment, and her eyes, once alive, now burn with an insane, malevolent gleam. With a toothless smile that further distorts her grotesque face, she approaches the nearest goat, which trembles uncontrollably. Mercilessly, she drives the knife into the animal's teat, not to kill it, but to extract the vital fluid that runs in its veins. The sound of blood spurting and the goat's desperate bleating echo in the barn's silence as the witch tilts her head to drink directly from the scarlet flow. With each gulp, a high-pitched, manic cackle issues from her throat, a sound that chills the spine and reverberates through the wooden walls, haunting the scene. In the house, Catherine is awakened by a vision or hallucination. She sees Caleb alive and well, holding baby Samuel. He asks her to come with him. Catherine, in her desperate desire to reunite with her lost children, nurses the baby. But the vision becomes a nightmare. She is nursing a crow which pecks her breast violently, tearing blood and flesh. Her scream of agony mixes with the chaos unfolding outside. William, alerted by the sounds from the barn, runs outside. Near the house, he sees Black Philip rearing on his hind legs, looking at him. The black goat, with demonic strength, charges William, pushing him against a pile of firewood. Early the next morning, Thomasin wakes in the silent barn and sees the door open. She realizes the twins have disappeared. She approaches the house and finds the scene of slaughter. Catherine, maddened by grief and demonic vision, attacks Thomasin, blaming her for everything. She tries to strangle her, her face contorted into a mask of hatred. Thomasin, in a desperate fight for her life, grabs a nearby cleaver and buries it in her mother's chest. Catherine falls dead. Thomasin stands panting, covered in blood, the sole survivor of her family's apocalypse. In the ensuing stillness, her rage and despair give way to a strange resignation. She has lost everything: her family, her faith, her future. She has nothing left to hold on to, no moral code, no hope of salvation. She wanders into the dark barn. She approaches Black Philip, the only other living creature in the house. In a low voice, she speaks to him, asking what he can give her. She makes an offer, a pact. She begs him to speak to her as the twins said he did. The goat remains silent for a long moment. Then a voice answers, not the goat's, but in the tone of a smooth, sibilant male voice, which we can infer is the voice of evil. He asks her if she can understand what he says. He tells her to take off her clothes. Thomasin, stripped of everything, literally and figuratively, obeys. She signs her name in a black leather book that materializes before her, using her own blood, and thus the pact is sealed. Naked, she follows Black Philip into the depths of the dark forest. He guides her to a clearing where a great fire crackles. Around the fire, a coven of naked witches dances and sings in a frenetic, profane celebration. They sing, levitate, and their bodies contort in demonic ecstasy. Thomasin, hesitant at first, approaches the group. A strange sense of belonging and power begins to take hold of her. Her fear turns into euphoria. A slow, chilling smile spreads across her face. She joins her new sisters, finally free from her family's oppression and from her faith, but eternally damned. The film ends with this image of ecstatic terror. The young Puritan accused of witchcraft finally embraces her fate, finding her salvation in damnation, henceforth living at the heart of evil and darkness.